So officially it's early in the morning, it's about 9 a.m. and the garden topsoil has arrived. I went ahead and got 3 yards of topsoil. It costs about $143 for 3 yards plus the $40 delivery fee, and that's included in the $143. So it's, before tax, though, it's $98 for all 3 yards. And so I went ahead and had it delivered early this morning, and the reason that I got topsoil instead of gardening compost is because I used all of the manure from and bedding from my duck coop in order to fill these beds first, and that's what I'm using as my nitrogen source. And then I'm going to pile the topsoil on top of these beds and then plant into them. So if I wouldn't have been using a nitrogen source, then I would have probably got either mushroom compost or a blend to go with the topsoil. And the blend has wood, it has a few other things, I'm not sure exactly what, but it's just a blend of different things that you would put in compost in garden soil. So it's kind of like compost, but it's not the same as mushroom compost. And so a lot's happened here just since yesterday, because last night, although this fence has to be stretched out, it's just kind of here to cause a border in the garden. It's going to hold anything I want to trellis, peas and probably some smaller cucumbers. It's only 3 feet tall because our city ordinance doesn't allow anything taller than 3 feet in our yard, which is disappointing, but it is what it is. And that's for the front yard, which primarily most of my yard is my front yard. Guys, I know you always see this tiller in my front yard. This was my grandfather's tiller, and while I don't till, I only use like no dig methods. It's just kind of a nice reminder of watching him work in the garden, but also I guess just what we've come from and how well we're doing. Look at this. This came from my great-grandmother. My grandmother gave it to me when she passed away in December, so it's really special. Now, here is the first garden bed from that tree that we downed the other day, and it's looking really good. I'm really impressed that we were able to use the tree that we had to cut down anyways in our garden and create this really long bed. And then right here you can see the potatoes that we transplanted, and I'll upload a longer video on that explaining all about this potato, but I found it in my compost bin, and so I'm actually propagating it to get seeds right now, which is really exciting. So it looks so different over here with all of these new beds. I'm really excited. The onions are doing well too. You can kind of see me in my shadow because the way the sun's sitting on our garden this time of day. And look at this. We used another part of the tree. This is all one tree, and it created this other bed, and I already had these wooden posts, so I used them to make a teepee to grow beans on, and I'm going to plant something else, probably more shade-loving, underneath it. But initially, it's not going to be full of beans, so I get to try to figure out what to grow until it's more shaded. I do have some squash, but I am worried that once the beans take over, the squash would be too shaded out. But these squash that I currently have ready are the calabaza, and they're an early variety. They only take 40-something days. And so I think they would be good to get out here. They're already starting to produce flowers, even inside. So none of them have opened, but I want to get them in the ground now while they're at their peak before they start to kind of wear out. I have transplanted them once into a larger container, a 5-inch, and I think that's made a big difference. But these beds will be their permanent homes, and also all of the lettuce that you see inside of my house and the onions are going to be planted out here. So hopefully this will be plenty of dirt and room for all of that. You can kind of see it over there. I'm pretty excited. So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to get so much that I couldn't get it in here immediately and ants could get into it. So I got 3 yards instead of a full load. This is about half a load. And I'm glad that we did, because I think it'll fill up these garden beds, and I'll still have plenty to do a couple of more garden beds, which I'm pretty excited about. You can see there's more of this tree downed sitting right here, and even more over here, and some right here. So these are just the larger logs, and here's the smaller logs that I'm going to chip up and also put back in my garden. But these smaller logs, I'm thinking I'll be able to make another smaller garden bed out of. I just don't know exactly where I'm going to put it right this second. So as soon as I figure that out, it'll be put over here with the rest of it. And so you can kind of see in proximity, here are my 2 blackberry beds that also have the strawberries and all of the other things in it that you see pretty regularly. And then the small onion container, then this bed, and the other bed next to it. So you can kind of get an idea of where everything is. Now our yard is pretty long, so the garden just on this side goes all the way across and all the way to the road. That's a lot of garden space. So I'm pretty excited. There's a lot to get done, but there's still so much room to expand in our yard. Our goal is that before we're going to move to a bigger property, we're going to pretty much max out what we have in the city until our kids get a little older, live here, and then kind of show everyone what's possible on an urban lot. Now, I'm over here getting bit by ants, so I'm trying to rub them off a little bit while I'm walking. I don't know where they came from. I guess they're just kind of walking through the grass finding food, and I'm just happen to be in the way. So I'm going to start putting soil in here, and I'll kind of show what it looks like after the soil's mounded up and when the plants get in, so you kind of have a good idea of what to expect. So I started loading up this wheelbarrow with dirt so that I could put it into the beds, the topsoil, and then the wheel went completely flat under the weight of it. So I guess I need to air that up. I don't even know how to go about airing up a wheelbarrow tire, to be honest. I'm just like, wow, figures. I think I underestimated the weight of this topsoil because I'm used to carrying mulch and things around, and of course dirt is going to be a lot heavier than just mulch or the compost from my chickens and ducks. So, I don't know why I always say chickens. Currently we don't have chickens, they're in the incubator, but it was originally a chicken coop when we first moved here. Now it's definitely a duck and geese coop, so from my ducks and geese. Darn. And you can see just this wheelbarrow, it didn't really make a dent in the soil at all. Just a little dent, but not really. I'm out of breath now. I ended up taking a 5-gallon bucket and scooping 2 buckets of dirt out of this, and the wheel just popped right back up, so I guess it's just not built for heavy work. I borrowed this one from my dad, but I'm definitely gonna have to get a bigger one. At this point, I might have to just get a small tractor, as much dirt work as I seem to be doing all the time. So you can see the garden bed is mostly finished. At least a good 75-80% of it is. It's just this area right here, which is bigger than it looks. And I'm already beyond exhausted. I don't think exhausted is the right word for what I'm feeling right now. I didn't account for, I thought, okay, I got up early and everything else, and didn't account for the deficit from cutting down the tree 2 days ago and putting all the beds together yesterday, and just life in general. So I'm beyond exhausted. I'm going to finish out this bed for sure and get it watered in and try to get it planted. But this bed over here, I don't know. I don't know if I can make it through to get it done, honestly. I'm pretty wore out. So I'm telling you what, gardening is a lot of work. Anyone who says it isn't, I don't know how you do it. But it's coming along. I mean, you can see it's doing pretty well. Now, this topsoil does have a bunch of lumps in it, and that's clay, because here our soil's pretty much clay, and it's gumbo clay at that. And so, but here's a good idea, just how deep it is before those shavings are really down there. So that's a good couple inches. Well, that's more than that. It's like 4 inches deep. So that's a good amount. And the idea is that this will break down and contact the actual soil after the grass dies and collect all of that nutrients too. And then I won't be doing anything crazy in these beds from then on out. I'll just add probably compost a couple inches a year right on top of it, and that should be enough to feed it. I also ordered some nutrients and probiotics for my garden from Whispering Willow Farms earlier this year, and I haven't got a chance to use those yet. So I think one is potassium, the other one for sure is the calcium. And calcium is something that we always really struggle with, especially with the amount of rain that we have kind of washing it away in heavier feeders like squash, tomatoes, things of that nature. So I'm hoping to kind of combat that this year, and I went ahead and ordered those. So I'm excited to give them a try and looking forward to some videos that can kind of show more ways to use them and everything else. I have no idea how to use them right now myself. I really have to read the directions. I just kind of set them aside because when we bought them, it was the dead of winter. All of our gardening spaces were full of turnips and things of that nature, and so it really wasn't a concern to try and figure it out. But now spring is here, and even without planting, as you can see by these potatoes, it's getting ahead of me. It's just doing its own thing, so it's time to prepare. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just fill in the rest of this area. I'm going to water it in, and then I'm going to start planting some plants. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and plant all the squash I can in this bed, and if I put them 1 foot apart, I should be able to get a minimum of 16 plants in here, but actually probably more if I do. I'll just go ahead and do them probably about 1 foot apart on this side and on this side, and at least do one on each end. But I'm not sure 100% because right here, where this kind of little fence is that we just put up last night, I want to lay down some cardboard and put some of the soil in and amend it, and probably plant some peas or some other stuff in there. They don't really need a lot of nitrogen. They fix their own nitrogen, both peas and beans do. And so they can handle growing in some of this topsoil that's contacted with this ground. And I think if I actually put some compost down there from our compost pile, I could get away with not putting down cardboard so that they can contact into the ground sooner. But what I'm going to do is lay cardboard down and probably wet it so that the peas have a head start above the weeds, and their roots can at least break through the cardboard. But that'll give all of this growing space. But you would think there would be some shading going from this 3-foot fence, but our yard is entirely open, and so we get sun the way that we're facing north, and so the sun just goes over the top of us and it catches every part of the garden. In fact, the biggest issue that we have during summer is that we get too much direct sun, and so some shade cloths are definitely going to have to be ordered for these beds this summer. But I'm so excited. I mean, it's really coming along. It's crazy that how much can change in just a few days, you know? I'm really impressed with this. So now I know the wheelbarrow can only hold like 45-50 pounds max, and honestly, it's probably best that I only fill it halfway because it's a lot of work. Gonna have amazing shoulders when this is all said and done. For me, the hardest part of the garden is always designing and building it. The easy part for me is just harvesting vegetables and getting it put away. And I know that's also hard, but constantly building, it can be exhausting. It catches up to you, especially, you know, when you start having a family and all those responsibilities. It's a lot. So here you can kind of see what indention was made on the dirt, and quite frankly, it's not a lot. So my husband will have us wish he wanted to use a little bit of this topsoil if there was any left to fill in some holes over here. And yeah, I definitely think there's going to be some left. There's absolutely no way I could use all this topsoil, and I won't need to. I mean, it only takes a few wheelbarrows to fill up this over here, and honestly, I got a little tired, so I just took the 5-gallon bucket to fill in some of the holes too. So there's that. And I'm probably going to add a couple more smaller garden beds, but I don't know if that's going to get done today. I might just lay the wood out because that's heavy, or not as heavy, and worry about soil later. I definitely know that right now I'm going to go inside and get a drink and rest, and then I'm going to get out here. I'm going to finish this garden bed, and you can see where Lexi was kind of sitting here playing in the dirt, and she was tired out quickly. The sun was beating down already at 9 a.m. It's well into the 80s. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's not even March yet. How is this possible? My sister lives in Rhode Island, and she's actually getting a severe snowstorm today, to the fact that they closed everything down. So it's crazy to me, because I always think that Texas, you know, being from Texas, you think the exception is, oh, they have a blizzard. That's crazy. But realistically, like, there's just a few states that don't experience that kind of cold weather, and we're one of them. So I was telling her last night, like, it blows my mind, because I always think, oh, it should be warm right now, and you go up north a little bit and you're like, why is it so cold? You know, it's just, we're the exception to the rule. When you grow up here your whole life, though, you don't realize it until you start learning a little bit more. Alright, so I'm gonna go take a rest, and then I will get out here, finish this, water it down, and plant it out, and we'll see what it looks like. I'm really excited. I'm trying to catch it on video, but every time I stop working, my cat runs away. There he goes. He's playing in the dirt pile and running all around the yard in the process. It's so hilarious. There are these giant dirt balls over there, and he's just rolling around with them and acting crazy. Hold on, let me see if I can't turn around. Shadow, where'd you go? I don't know where he went. I'm looking. I don't see him anywhere in the yard. He's hiding somewhere playing. Oh, there he is. He comes back around. So he ran all the way through the dirt pile, like, did some tumbling. He was over there under the clubhouse playing in the bucket, jumped out and ran over here. And he's just having the time of his life. I wish I could get more of him running around playing and rolling around with the dirt balls in the soil, because it's hilarious to watch. He's so funny. Okay, so it took me a minute, but I got everything filled in this garden bed, and you can see it looks pretty good. I didn't want to mound it over. My original plan was to think maybe mounding it over, but I got to thinking about it, and I just happened to be watching a video from Charles Dowding last night about if you mound your soil up too much, the water, instead of seeping in, might drain off unevenly. So I thought, well, you know what? If this was rainy season and I was constantly worrying about water just filling up my beds, then I would probably mound it up. But we are entering the drier season of the year pretty soon. So what I'm going to do, instead of hand watering this time, is I'm going to get the water hose and spray all this, because there's a lot to spray. And then after these beds are built, one of my next major projects is going to be getting one of those IBC containers or 55-gallon buckets into this area so that I can hand water, and the water will be right here in the garden, and I won't have to go all the way back to the back tank to grab water. So we are on city water, but I'm really trying to move away from using the city water as much as possible when it comes to our garden, and kind of survive on the water that we catch. So we have a 1,000-gallon tank that's has at least 850, 900 gallons in it right now. It's almost completely full. And that's what I've been using for things that are more established. But the hose will not reach here, and I'm not carrying pumped water that far. What I'll probably do is use the cart my husband just built and have him put a tank on it and bring it over here so it can be used that way. I think that's just a much better idea. I'm thinking maybe I'll put it at the end of this bed, just somewhere in the garden where I can easily access it. I could also probably put it in the tree line. Problem is, the city's weird with their ordinances, and I need to put it somewhere where I can paint it and make it look pretty so that they don't get upset about it. Or even hide it behind a garden bed, maybe? That wouldn't be such a bad idea. So I'm watering in this bed, and it's taking me a matter of like 30 seconds to realize that we're going to have to get some kind of mulch on top of this bed after the plants are planted, or we're going to have a serious issue when it rains. The mulch will do two things. Now that it's getting warmer, it will help keep the water soaked up so that it's not flooding the plants. It will also help retain moisture so that the plants aren't severely dehydrated in our hot Texas sun. So it'll kind of work both ways. It will kind of soak up this water and help distribute it a little better, and also just keep the water from drowning my plants, but also keep the plants from going thirsty from not enough water. It's funny when you're gardening, it's like one extreme or the other. Either there's not enough water or there's too much, and you gotta have to figure it out. So right here, there's this little separation between the logs, and the water's actually draining through there, which is kind of funny. It's draining fairly quickly, but it really just looks like a muddy mess. I don't want to put the pine chips directly on top of this because there is still some manure in it that needs to break down, and I don't want to burn the roots of my plants. So what I'll probably do is get all my plants planted, and then at some point later in the week, just maybe go and get like a yard or so of mulch and mulch in the top of these beds around the plants. I think that's going to be our best plan of action. So now it's time to get these squash plants in here and see what we can't get done. So right now I'm just kind of digging these little holes in the soil, and I'm going to pop some of these plants in here. And here are the plants. If you've been around for a minute, you recognize these as all of the ones that I was growing inside. I started all of these from seed myself, so I'm pretty proud of that fact. And I'm very excited to get them off the shelf. I still haven't started tomatoes or any other season crops besides these, just because I didn't have the space. I only could afford to get the 2 grow lights, so I had to just start where I could start, and that's fine because I didn't have any grow lights before this. So you can see these are the second time that they've been moved, and this is the larger pot. I started them out in, let's see, what were they? 2.5 inch pots, and moved them. So anywhere from a 4 inch to a 5 inch pot seems to work for moving up. I really prefer 5 inch. And I actually think that these are 4.5 inch. So you can kind of see how well the roots are developed here. I mean, that's pretty good. It's only been a couple of weeks since I planted them. And I planted them when I transplanted all the way up to the leaves, and you can see all of that developed into roots. So they're a lot like tomatoes. They have those hairs on them, just like tomatoes or tomatillos if you've grown those. And oops, I tore the leaf. You can just plant it right on up to the bottom of that first set of leaves, and everything else will become a root system. So that's really nice. And also when you have some insect damage, like we get really bad squash bugs, I can pull out the squash bug and then bury it and usually be okay. But what I like to do anytime I'm growing squash is, as it grows, I come and bury the stem. Now I don't know if that would work for winter squash because I've only ever grown summer squash. So I guess that's something that would be interesting to find out. Now, technically I should be using both hands to pull these out, but I have the phone in the other hand, so I'm just kind of plopping them out. You can see they can take a beating. I don't recommend doing this, by the way. Do as I say, not as I do kind of situation, but I'm just kind of pushing them in, you can see. So, I mean, it's pretty good. They're actually more like 18 inches apart than a foot apart, but I like the spacing. Look how healthy they look. I'm hoping that they stay this way. I'm gonna mulch in around all of these plants, but I'm amazed how big these are in such a short period of time. These were started like the 1st of January, the 2nd of January, somewhere around there. So maybe later. I actually have to check my records, but you can see it didn't take but less than a month for me to have to move them up to these larger pots. And while they could have gone a little bit longer, they're starting to get all of this formation down there. And I know that before too long, flowers are going to try to poke out. And I think it's not ideal to have flowers forming on your plants when you plant them in the ground. It doesn't give them time to really establish. Luckily, these have a pretty advanced root system because after they formed in those 2.5 inch pots, I potted them up into these larger pots. And I think that made a big difference, and hopefully that'll help them get the nutrients that they need and establish better before it gets too hot for them. Squash bugs, I've already seen them out this year. I've already seen them out, and I've already seen a ton of stink bug nymphs out, also known as leaf-footed bugs. I actually have a little video about them from last year, just the sheer amount of them crawling on my plants. Now we have a system where they're pretty well managed everywhere else, but the one place that I always seem to lose in the garden is when it comes to squash. That's why it was so important for me to get out here and start squash inside, get a head start, and hopefully get ahead of all of the horrible insects. I know that they have a use and they're great, but they're not great for me harvesting squash. Okay, so I have everything fully planted, and one thing I did notice is that these are the bigger squash that I was able to transplant. The smaller squash that I wasn't able to transplant, they're looking pretty leggy and sad, and I actually broke a couple of them trying to move them apart. So I need to up pot those ASAP if they're not going to come outside, or find a new place for them in the garden. So I think that's something I'm going to focus on. And this is one of the smaller ones. You can see just how sad it looks compared to one of these bigger ones that had its own pot. Because I started 3 seeds per pot, and on pretty much all of them, all the seeds germinated, which I wasn't expecting. 100% germination rate. That's insane. And I had one pot that didn't, so I guess that would actually give me like a 99% germination rate if only one pot of 3 seeds didn't germinate. And I am a little disappointed because the squash plant that I guess you could say coveted the most, but not really. The one squash that I really love is kind of like a patty pan squash. It's called a Sunny Delight, and I only had 1 or 2 seeds left, and I planted those, and one sad looking plant came up, but I went to put in the garden and the roots were so underdeveloped, and the plant was already experiencing some weird darkening and dying of the leaves, and I just fed it to the ducks and geese because as much as I love that plant, I'm better off as early as it is in the year buying new seeds and trying to start some of that squash still, or even growing it in the fall, than I am putting a squash plant in my garden that's already sick. And sometimes you have to make those sacrifices in order to not attract aphids and squash bugs to your garden, because plants send out hormonal signals when they're sick, and that's what attracts certain pests to kind of come over and devour those plants, and then the other ones keep growing. That's not a risk I'm willing to take right now. So you see there's like a ridiculous amount of space left. Well, these squash plants are going to get used. They're going to fill in most of the space. But in the meantime, I have a couple of options. I have some lettuce plants I could grow here, but because lettuce like shade, this is pretty direct sunlight, and also lettuce is going to require a lot of harvesting. I have about 120 plus lettuce plants. They're going to require constant cutting back, and I don't want to trample my squash in the process. So what I'm thinking is either going to put the onions in these spaces right here, or I have several carrot varieties and also have some watermelon radishes I can sprinkle in here, and that can fill the space. And then when those are ready to harvest, it'll be about the time that the squash is getting big enough to start taking over this entire bed. So that's kind of the plan, and you can see the difference in what the bed looks like before to what it looks like now. I'm pretty excited because this is just a tree that had to be cut down in my yard. It made this entire bed. It will make another bed here, and there's still all of this wood left over pretty much everywhere where I could probably make some smaller beds or do other things of that nature with it. So gardening season is not disappointing this year. I still have 2 fairly large trees at the front of my yard that have to come down, and well, I guess 1 fairly large tree with 2 tree trunks and 1 that's kind of smaller that still have to cut down. So all of that can be made into beds, which I'm pretty ecstatic about. That's definitely going to expand my garden operation without me having to invest all this money to get sites for the garden so I can establish it. So I'm looking forward to that. All of the space that you're seeing great in between everything will be contractor paper, cardboard, or something will be laid down. It will be chipped in. It will all be pathways, and I think that's going to be pretty incredible. And then I know there's a lot of work that goes on here that you don't get to see on camera, and so all of this will have peas or beans or cucumbers or something planted in there. Probably plant the peas and cucumbers or beans and cucumbers around the same time. Especially peas, they need to get in the ground now or I'll never have a chance to harvest. If they're not in by March, that's pretty much it down here for peas. And I have to get some heat resistant varieties. But I'm going to try and get those in the ground and maybe put some cucumbers in when they start getting ready to finish so the cucumbers develop. And instead of pulling out the peas, I'll just trim them back down to the roots and leave the roots in the ground to further break down and add some good nitrogen to the soil. So this is it. I appreciate you guys taking the time to kind of hang out with me and watch today. I'm pretty excited about these beds. I can't wait to finish figuring out whether I want to plant the radishes or carrots or onions in here. I know onions won't be ready until June, but they're a little more sturdy and they can take a beating, and I don't think they're going to take up too much space in the middle, kind of occupy a different root zone than the squash. So I'm excited. I can't wait to show you what we decided to plant and how well they're taking off. I'm pretty ecstatic about that.